Hi, folks. So I wanted to start really simple this term with the idea of data and that GIS is a kind of data science, which you might have not heard of before, but basically means we're gathering information about the world and we're recording it, and then we're analyzing it, using it to tell other people about the world, right? It's a form of science. And really, GIS doesn't have a topic, right? It's not necessarily a natural science. It's not necessarily a social science. It's not necessarily about business or about nonprofits or government or whatever, but it can be used to just gather information about the world, right? Um, so we're going to be thinking about data and how we collect, um, analyze, and visualize data this term. Okay. Um, so GIS is a form of data science. Data is observations about some phenomenon at a particular time and place. Okay, so I put this like three-dimensional cube on here to try to get you to visualize what this means, right? So when we're talking about GIS data that has a geographic element to it, we have the phenomenon that we're observing, right? So that's the attribute data, right? Maybe it's we're observing cats. So we record information about cats. If there's something going on that isn't cat related, right? We don't record those observations because the phenomenon we're interested in is cats. Okay. Then not only do we record things about the cats, like their characteristics, like how big they are, how fluffy they are, what color they are, we record the cat's location. That's the geographic piece of the data. And we record when the cat was in that particular location. So it's sort of a three-dimensional thing. There's three things going on. There's the phenomenon you're observing, there's the locations, and then there's the times when that observation was made. Okay. Um, so here are some cats. These are photos of my cats. And we're going to record the location of the cats, which cat we're observing, you know, other characteristics about the cat, maybe what it's doing, right? And the time and date, right? And when we have a collection of pictures like this, we can get information about the cat's activities, personality, habits, behaviors, right? Um, when you observe each photo on its own, right, it's a sort of a qualitative picture. You can describe that photo and, things about the cat, like what color it is, what it's doing, its expression, and stuff like that. These are not numerical or quantitative qualities. These are qualitative, right? But if we take all of the photos together and group them and look at their metadata, their basic information, like when they were taken and where they were taken, and maybe by who, right? Um, we can then start to get quantitative information about how much time the cats spend doing different kinds of activities, where they are located most of the time, what are their favorite places, right? So we can quantify the information about the cats. Okay, so that's one way to think about data is quantitative data and qualitative data. We're going to talk about some other ways to think about data as well. But this is sort of where the chapter starts out talking about data is like an example of data would be photographs, right? So in the chapter, they talk about photographs from this wedding ceremony that the author's wedding, right? And then they start to visualize this data in different ways, right? So they take the qualitative data and they look at it as a collection of observations, And to simplify and to be able to see the patterns, right, they break it up by time when the photo was taken. And then for each photo, they give it a color that, like, if you looked at the overall photo, what's the main color in that photo, right? So they're generalizing from the specifics of the photo to bring out this pattern in what was going on at the wedding, right? So this is one way you can do it. They've created this sort of bar chart of the wedding photographs to give you a sense of the pattern of the photography, what colors were involved in the wedding, when most of the photographs were taken, and you can start to see that patterns are emerging about what were some of the most important things to take photographs of, right? So then they have a even more simplified bar chart of photographs over time. So you can see when there are peaks and valleys based on when the photographers thought it was most important to take photos, right? So this brings up the issue of sampling. You want to think about when you're collecting data or when you're looking at data that was collected, how was that data collected? What's the pattern of data collection? So for a wedding, right, they're trying to capture the most important moments in the wedding, and so the photographers are taking more pictures during the time periods when more important things are happening. If we wanted to get an overall picture of just what a wedding is like, and we wanted to capture all of the moments, right, we would choose a different type of sampling method because we would want to capture an even number of photos all across the wedding, maybe, or take photos at random times to see what was happening at different points during the wedding, right? So it's really important to think about, well, whenever we're collecting data, we can't collect data about everything. So we have to choose a sampling method, right? We have to choose when and where we are collecting our observations and what information we're writing down or what information we're capturing, whether it's through a photograph or some other means, notes or that kind of thing, right? So there's always going to be a sampling method. Hopefully from some of your science classes, you have thought about what the sampling method should be, whether it should be random, whether it needs to be through certain networks, whether it needs to be an even sample, like over time or over space. So I'm not going to talk a lot more about sampling right now, but you should be thinking about how was this data collected? How did they choose what information to include and what information not to include? So one thing I want to mention is with GIS, we spend a lot of time using data sets that have already been collected rather than collecting our own data sets. And this has advantages and disadvantages, right? So if you have an existing data set, that might be really convenient. It could be cheap or free, and it's going to save you a lot of time potentially. Another advantage is maybe this data has been collected over a long period of time, and so you are able to look backwards in time because maybe if you collected data, you would only have a short period of time to do that data collection in, right? But you also have to then think about what are the problems or potential disadvantages about this data set. So maybe it's not available for the time period that you're really interested in. Maybe it's the wrong spatial resolution. Maybe it's just not precise enough. It doesn't have the details that you're looking for. Another problem could be that people who collected the data when they were entering that data into the computer or whatever they put it in, they weren't very careful about it. This is true, especially of historical data. Maybe it's just handwritten notes or something like that, and the data set exists, but it might take a long time to actually collect and analyze, right? Because you need to put it into a format that is probably computer readable, right? Advantages of your own collecting your own data is you get to choose exactly how you go about collecting the data. You get to choose your sampling method, you get to choose when and where you collect observations, all of that. You get to choose the resolution, like do you need to observe things down to a very fine level of detail? You can also design your own data collection methods to save yourself time when it comes to data cleanup, when it comes to entering that information into the computer, the database that you're going to be using. Disadvantages are collecting your own data can be very, very expensive and time consuming, and you usually can't look back in time. So it really depends on what you're studying and what you're interested in learning about the world, which of these you do, right? But in GIS class, we're going to do a lot of working with other people's data sets. So you need to really be thinking critically about where did that data set come from, who collected it, how did they go about it, okay? So one of the things the book mentions is this idea of the quantified self movement, and this is a really interesting sort of artistic movement that has come about in recent years because of all the data that is now possible to collect, that you can actually collect information about yourself or go through and collect information about a particular person or a particular area. So this is, for example, this person, Aaron Partecki, and he collected GPS traces of his activities during these years. On the map, you can see the yellow, the red, and the blue, and sort of the pattern of his activities during these years. If you break it apart by the patterns of his activities by activity type, then if you start to be able to use these maps to observe patterns in his movement, the differences between where he would go when he was going to eat food or something versus where he was going when he was running errands or that kind of thing, right? And you start to see how useful it can be to explore these different patterns visually. The other thing I want to talk to you guys about is ways of explaining data or of displaying data. So it doesn't always have to be a map, okay? The geographic component of your data can be really important, and a map can be a really good choice in terms of displaying your data. But in a lot of cases, you might want to display your data as using words, using pictures, making a list, making a table, making a chart. So if you take a second here, this is from a book called 2005 Annual Report by Nicholas Felton, and he's recording some of the things that happened in his life in 2005, and you can see there's different ways that he's illustrating or displaying that information. So for example, he's got a pie chart showing his restaurant types of restaurant visits, and he's got a little list of the 5 most frequented restaurants, right? And you can see his choice of text size and text color to try to make this information really easily readable and understandable to someone who's just glancing through the book. In some cases, he's got things quantified, like how many songs played, and and if you look down there, iTunes songs played, 16,862. That's just a nice big piece of text with the important number there, right? So what I want you guys to be thinking about is, how do I tell the story of this information that I have collected about, whatever phenomenon I'm exploring? How do I share that with the world in a way that is compelling and understandable and useful? Okay, so here are some more examples of some interesting data collection and data visualization examples. Okay, so here are a couple pages from a book where we're talking about times spent with Olga. We don't know who Olga is exactly, but maybe a friend. So we've got Olga everywhere, Olga in the Bay Area, Olga in New York City. We've got a kind of a map showing activity points in each of these locations. So we've got data displayed as a map. We've got data displayed as a pie chart. We've got data displayed as bar charts. We've got data displayed in lists with text. So we have all these different ways of showing the patterns of activity with this person, Olga, right? And the diversity of the ways of displaying the information really adds to our understanding of, and we've got a line chart of the days of the week, like how much time we spent with Olga during certain days. You can see how most of the time spent together was on Saturdays, less time during the middle of the week, right? So we can see different kinds of patterns when we use different types of data visualizations. Not everything needs to always be a map. Here is another couple pages to think about. We've got on the left here, this person and their activities. So we've got some mapping of their socializing. We've got a bar chart of what kinds of activities they like to do. And we've got some text telling some details about their life. Over here on the right, we've got books published over time. And so we've got a bar chart, and we've got some other ways of displaying this information about books. Okay, so as we go through the term, I want you to think about not just displaying your data that you're working on as a map, but also displaying it in other formats as well, because often the map will combine really well with some other ways, some text, maybe some charts, some graphs, and to actually tell a fuller story and explain in a more detailed and understandable way to your audience what are the important details that you want them to understand about this information. So this is a really fun project from the textbook. It's a book called maps from a book called A More Perfect Union, and the artist actually went through and did an analysis of online dating profiles, and the words on the map are some of the most frequently used words to describe each person in their dating profile, displayed by location. So you can see over here on the California map, there's the word thoughtful, that people in this part of California frequently describe themselves as thoughtful, right? Down here in Los Angeles, you can see acting is a frequently used word in these profiles. So it's kind of a fun, different way to display information about dating profiles as a map. So being creative about how you display the information and thinking a little bit outside the box can be really helpful, useful in coming up with data visualizations and ways of communicating to the world about this data that you're exploring. All right, more up next.